Hello, welcome back to Hunter Tuned. Today we're out at the shop working on a Integra. And this car got dropped off a couple days ago, and I've been digging into it the last couple days trying to figure out a bunch of little bugs that this car has. So just kind of wanted to go over some of the stuff with this thing and show you some of the fixes that I've come up with and maybe get to dyno tuning. So this is a 2000 Integra, 99 2000, and it came in starting but running really poorly. Did not have a tachometer working and does not have like the tune was extremely rich, but it wasn't actually the tune, it was some other stuff that was going on with the car. So we did fix a lot of this stuff already. He brought two ECUs with the car, and it has a jumper harness to go from the OBD2B or the 2000 year to OBD1 harness. And then, like I said, he brought two different computers with. So we have two different ECUs to play with. One is from HA Motorsports and one is just a regular chip P28. And this car also has one of the Moats Demon boards installed into this what appears to be a converted P28. So when I remove the Demon board out of this ECU, it is sitting into a zero insertion force style socket. Right here, it's got the latch on it. I hate these sockets with a passion. They may be nice if you are taking a chip in once in a while, but from my personal experience, these style sockets do not have good connection characteristics. They don't connect very well, and when you're talking with an ECU, if you don't have a very solid connection, it's not the greatest. It can just lead to issues. And I actually normally have really good luck with these HA Motorsports ECUs, but this guy had a ZIF style socket soldered directly into the ECU, which normally when you use these style zero insertion force style sockets, they go on top of a normal standard socket that actually gets soldered into the ECU, because the way that the zero insertion force, they're called ZIF or zero insertion force sockets, the way that those things are, like if you want a zero insertion force socket, I have really good ones here. These are a lot better design, the ones I get from Jason. But the ones with the latch, I don't like. And normally, you're supposed to solder in a socket like this one. They have a lot thicker of a pin to go into the ECU, where those style sockets, the pins are so thin, you can heat them up and just burn the pin right off. So like I said, I just don't like using them. I don't know, I have a regular standard socket somewhere, but normally you always put the standard socket in and then the ZIF on top of the standard socket if you want to run a ZIF. So hopefully that makes sense. But this is the Demon. Normally when I run a Demon 2, I just put pins, I'll solder these pins directly into the ECU instead of the pins into a ZIF and then whatever. Moral of the story is this computer does not work because of the pin situation that is going on inside of here. When this is installed into the ECU, it's loose, it doesn't make a good connection, and it has a solid check engine light, the ECU is bad. So anyways, to eliminate this whole setup from being an issue, is I actually put the Demon into a known good ECU that I had that was set up for a Demon. That Del Sol, actually, I borrowed his ECU to just verify that all that stuff was good, and it is. So I'm not going to mess with the Demon because his other chipped ECU just had a couple little sketchy solder joints that I fixed up, and it's just normal chipped ECU, and I'm just going to tune it with the Ostrich and then burn a chip. This thing's all motor anyways, it doesn't really need anything crazy, and I can tune it with the same Honda tuning suite with the Ostrich or the Demon. So I'm just going to tune it with this ECU because I got it working. The other one would probably work too, but I don't think it's needed right now to get that one to work. So at least we got one working out of the two. For me to do this ECU properly, I would want to get rid of this this ZIF socket and put a normal socket in here. And then moving on to under the hood, we got a distributor from an OBD2B car, which has the tack coming through on the distributor side, and on the engine harness side it does not have the tack wire coming out. So normally the blue wire is right here where my thumb is. And I verified all the wiring here was good. I had the cap off to verify like orange and white is CYP, which goes to black and yellow over here. And I was just verifying a bunch of stuff because once I figured out I got an ECU to work, I got a check engine light for the cylinder position sensor. So I started digging into, okay, this has a brand new distributor on it. It has sketchy wiring by the ECU that I have to look at, and just kind of put two and two together and found out some really weird wiring by the ECU that I'm currently having to fix. But in the mix of all this, I have a couple hours of diagnosing into figuring out why the car had the code, and you know, taking the distributor apart just to look at all the wire colors, because a lot of times these eBay distributors, the wire colors will not match up like with the factory harness. Like obviously this one is OBD1 colors, but an OBD2 plug, so it's kind of weird that way. And then this side, obviously yellow and black is my CYP, and orange and white over here is the CYP on the distributor side. And same with some of the other sensors, the colors do not match, but they line up. So that's all fixed, that's all good to go. But it seems like I get dealt a lot of these wiring headache cars, which kind of sucks, but I love to help people out, and honestly there's not really a lot of guys out there that are willing to do this kind of stuff, and I just like getting cars going that, you know, guys have just been sitting for, you know, who knows how long, and guys just give up on them because of stupid stuff like this that nobody really wants to deal with. But I try to come in clutch and you know, get these guys fixed up. So you can see a bunch of these wires down here that are bare and duct taped. So these wires here are actually the insulated wires. So all the distributor wiring usually on Honda will have shielding around it for like the CYP or the cylinder position, crank sensor, top dead center sensor, etc. is all going to be shielded wiring. So I went through here and I just checked out like what was going on, and this thing had the cylinder position and the crank sensor wiring like spliced together at the ECU and then running only to the crank sensor. Like two of the sensors were tied together and running to one to the distributor. What? Like crazy weird. Why would you do that? So I just looked up the pinouts and the schematics on this thing, and pretty much I just hooked up the wires factory, how they should be from the factory, and I got rid of the engine light. But I definitely have to clean this wiring up now, so I'm going to, I actually got my soldering station out, and I'm going to be doing some soldering and heat shrinking on these wires. But I really could not believe that literally the crank sensor, which I think is this blue one, and this white one, which is also like CYP, were tied together and then running just to the crank sensor or something like that. Something really weird and crazy. Like they tied, like you don't take a cam sensor and a crank sensor and put them together. They require totally different signals, and they require totally different wiring pathways. If you wire them together to one of the sensors and not the other, it's just going to throw everything off and run like a pile of crap, like it did when it showed up. So, I mean, this thing was like barely running, 10.0 air fuel, just pegged, you know, just chugging right along, and it did not run barely at all. I should have filmed something before I tore it all down, but you know, I got ahead of myself and I just want to get some of this stuff knocked out. So I'm gonna pick up with you guys in a little bit when I get this wiring situation figured out and cleaned up. Get the old soldering iron going here. I am feeling a little bit better, guys. I know last video really sick. Today I'm still sick. I'm definitely not coughing as much, but I still have a really like nasty cough, but it's not like I'm coughing all the time kind of thing. So hopefully I'm getting a little better. All right guys, so we got the distributor wiring figured out. Now we have no more check engine lights. The car is running way better than it was now that I got all that stuff sorted out. And then I just went through and verified my ignition timing now that we got the car running good. And there was no marking on the pulley because it was covered by the timing cover was blocking the timing marks. So I had to rotate the crank and go under there and mark where I could actually see where to set my ignition timing at with the timing light. And we synced it through the ECU. So now that the ignition timing is good on this thing, it is pretty much ready to be tuned. So I did find another issue with this car, and it is the tachometer and the gauge cluster lighting does not work. I have been pulling my teeth out for the last like 2 hours just trying to figure out what the hell is wrong, and I've come to a conclusion that it needs a new gauge cluster. Everything else works, like literally everything. Normally when like your gauge cluster lighting doesn't work, it's either like a taillight fuse, a radio fuse, something like that. So like, good thing is if you turn the headlights on and the gauge cluster stuff doesn't work, check your tail lights and check to see if your radio is good too, because gauge cluster lighting not working is usually because a blown fuse for the radio or the tail light fuse or illumination. One of those usually is the culprit for that. And all that stuff passes with flying colors. There's no issues with any of that stuff. And the tack not working can also be because this is a 2000 year Integra. They get their tack signal through the ECU, and then the ECU kind of sends it back over to the cluster instead of the actual tack signal from the distributor going to the cluster. The ECU is getting tack signal just fine. The ECU usually gets its tack signal, I believe, through the crank sensor, and then the cluster itself gets it through the signal on the igniter. So as you guys can see, there's no output on the engine harness side of things, but on the distributor there is a blue wire that is tack output. So normally when you have this style distributor on that style plug or OBD1 ECU swap, whatever, you have to manually run the blue wire, the thick blue one next to the black and yellow, off of the distributor. You have to run that wire over to the blue wire that's over here next to like the clutch master. So it's just one single blue wire. It has like a little connector thing on it. You cut that off and then splice in the blue wire from the distributor to there, and your tack should work again. I did that and the tack still didn't work, so I'm like, okay. So I ran the wire straight to the cluster, like right into the input to the clusters to eliminate all other wiring issues inside the car, and it still doesn't work. So on the back of the cluster there is a pin 13. It's the one way on the end here, and I just tapped into it real quick just to see, and still doesn't work. So that's why I'm leading to assume that the gauge cluster itself is bad. I do not have one here. The customer is actually going to throw in a gauge cluster himself. It's easy enough to do that. So yeah, now we have everything set up. Now I'm just going to tidy up this wire to the clutch master cylinder area over there to get that set up. So literally when he'll throw a cluster in this thing, everything's going to work perfectly. And we can still tune it without the tack on the gauge cluster working, as I have a tack on the data logger. All right guys, so that is going to wrap it up for today. I actually got a clip of that car on the dyno, but I was by myself and my camera like went dead because it was too cold outside. So I'll throw in a cell phone clip of the car ripping on the dyno. But everything seems to be working good. The car's definitely choked up by the cold air intake that is on it. It's got like a really small diameter cold air intake. And I was messing with it a little bit, but it started getting cold and it's getting late, so I had to get off the dyno. just got the chip burned onto the ECU, and everything is doing good on that thing. I'm really actually stoked that this car runs and drives as good as it does. He has to get a new cluster and get a new he's got to go through like the hubs and stuff on the car, he was saying, because they definitely make a lot of noise when I'm on the dyno, and I don't know, he said he's going to try to figure that stuff out. He brought it to me to get the wiring stuff figured out and to get it running good, so I did that. I'm very happy with it. Hopefully the customer is very happy as well, and hopefully you guys enjoyed this little video of us trying to diagnose this Integra, and hopefully you learned something. If you did, drop a like, subscribe, comment down below, and yeah, I'm gonna sit here, chill out, have a beer, and head home and get some rest. Have a good night, great night, and a better tomorrow. We'll see you later.